Hey, hey. Good to see everybody. Welcome, welcome. Glad to have everybody joining us. We've got a few more in the waiting room. Uh-oh, I'm sorry. My dog is barking and it made someone else's dog. I'm sorry. And now my other dog is barking. Welcome, welcome, everybody.
Thank you.
Sorry. Good evening, everybody. Welcome. So glad to have you. So glad that we are getting together to be able to do this important work. And I've still got people in the waiting room. There we go. Awesome. Um, Let me make a couple of introductions and let me see. I'm going to spotlight our speakers and welcome. My name is Amy Ezel. If I have not met you yet, I am the Director of Congregational Vitality and the Director of Communication for the Arkansas Conference of the United Methodist Church. We are going to, I'm so glad that you're with us tonight. So glad that you could take the time. This is going to be fast learning. It's going to come at you quick. I hope that you have a pencil or a highlighter for your book. If your books have not arrived yet, I apologize. I have mailed them all, and hopefully you'll get them soon. I would like to now introduce you to Reverend Dr. Blake Bradford, who is going to be leading this class tonight. And there you are. And Dr. Bradford is a friend and colleague. He is a former dean of the Arkansas Annual Conference Cabinet and former DS of the Northwest District, and is now currently serving as senior pastor of Fort Smith First United Methodist Church. Blake, you've written so many books and done so much of this work. I don't know what else to say. So I'm just going to turn it over to you and
Great.
let you tell everybody what they need to know.
Thank you, Amy. And
Thank
I'm just
you.
real grateful to share some time with you all today and this evening. Thank you for taking time out in your busy schedules, and I'm looking forward to just connecting with you all. I know that we've been talking about simplified structure for several years in our annual conference, and I've done different gatherings there. And my plan for this evening is to share some basic structure information, and I can go deeper and that sort of thing, and leave some time for some Q&A, because I know some of y'all have been using that system and some of you maybe haven't, and we'll kind of get a feel for that as we go through. So a little bit about me. I started working with Keiko Tan a number of years ago, and we came up with this is the third edition of Mission Possible. There you go, hold it back here. Third edition of Mission Possible. But they keep on getting thicker. This one is like a doorstop or something at this point. We're told by the publisher I'm not allowed to print any more books this big. Um, but we designed it as a workbook. And the idea behind it is it's a tool to use in your local church, and it has discussion questions for your church to work through, some big, heavy, weighty questions to think about, some creative opportunity kind of questions, some diagnostic questions for your church, and to guide you from the beginning all the way through a whole bunch of resources that are designed to be photocopied and shared and distributed. Another book we came up with after this third edition, this Mission Possible, which was really about simplified structure, and we did some other books too, was this Mission Possible for the Small Church. Uh, Knowing that some things needed to be adapted for the smaller church, especially those with less than full-time clergy, because there's a certain sort of leadership mix there that you need to adjust for. And we, in addition to having the simplified structure, we also knew that, well, just leadership in general is a little different, and how you plan ministries is a little different. And to design some things that were specific to small churches, because we noticed that most of the resources created for churches was designed for mid and larger churches. And so we wanted to create some resources for churches that didn't fit in that size category because there's excellent and amazing and vital ministries happening at all size churches. And so we wanted something specific for our smaller congregations around the country. And so that's why this book was created. And my usual statement is if you have a less than full-time pastor, it's probably a good book to have as the main, and then someone or a couple people need to have the big book. Uh, because this is like the big old thick owner's manual in the car, and sometimes you need to open up the big owner's manual because there's certain precise things in there. So what I like to do, and that so I hope that explains kind of some of the books you received, and I'll be using some page numbers out of the bigger red book. And here's the thing, a special gift for y'all. If y'all registered for this, and I think you all did, I'm going to send my slide deck to Amy. And that way, as a follow-up, as a gift to you all, here's my slide deck. And that way, y'all can use it in your local church and that sort of thing. I encourage, please don't share it out and about because it's got some copyright stuff. But I would love for y'all to be able to use it in your local church. So you don't have to like take photos or think you have to take notes like that. You'll get the full slide deck after this. So I hope you enjoy that. So we will jump in. Let's just jump in to where we're talking about simplified accountable structure. I'd like to start off though with a just a prayer blessing. Uh, Dear Lord, on this St. Patrick's Day, we think about what it means to reach new people. What new landscapes are you calling us to? And for us as leaders, how are you guiding us and helping us discern how to lead and how to creatively work in our congregations? Help us move beyond nostalgia into the future that you have for us. And this we ask in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen. Thank you again. Let's jump in. How about that, Amy? I'm going to share my screen here. See if I still remember how to do this sort of thing. Okay, there you go. This is getting into some simplified accountable structure stuff. And the first thing I'm going to do, because I know we're all starting at different spots on this, is just let's define our terms a little bit. And some of you have probably seen this before, and that's why I'm going to go quick through it, and then we're going to have Q&A, and we'll dig in. So first of all, I have some assumptions I make. And one of those is that the structures that we inherited with the multiple committees were not really designed for this moment in time. And here's what I mean by that. Most of these structures were designed in the post-World War II era when things were life moved a little slower. And expectations around church and how we reach people and all that were just running at a different pace. Well, if there's one thing I've noticed, especially in this post-COVID era, life doesn't move slow, and we need structures that are nimble enough to move in this era. And for some churches, that means you can work within the existing administrative structures just fine. And for other churches, maybe you need a different kind of model. And so we need to understand, though, that the administrative committees that most of us inherited weren't really designed for new stuff. It was designed to maintain the existing. And that's why you had all these checks and balances in the system for that, and all these committees reporting to committees. And there's a problem with that and the example I've used, and it's on page 8, is the egg hunt idea. And maybe people have come to you with ideas. They've come to me with ideas over the years. And the metaphor, the image I use is imagine some creative folks saying, "Hey, instead of an egg hunt at the church, what if we do this at a local park? And what if we invite different people to show up and put things in mailboxes and just see what would happen if we can make our egg hunt into a reaching new people event instead of just a taking care of our existing members event." And we get people's names, we do follow it, we have this whole the folks are real excited to have a plan. But then it has to go through the committees. And well, oh, okay. Well, if we're using the park, is there liability? Okay, the trustees needs to vote, and what will this cost? And finance needs to vote. And by the time everyone votes, it's August, and you missed your window for an egg hunt. And so you may think that's a funny idea, like, oh, that never would happen. I'll just say that that may or may not have actually happened to a church I served. So the idea is, I mean, let's create some nimble structures so we can take advantage of opportunities for ministry. And when you do that, I think that it creates some space for a new way to do leadership. First of all, clear lines of authority. Simpler structures allow generations that may not have grown up in systems which had multiple committee layers, just a flatter structure to go, okay, I understand this. And rising generations like that a little more. Um, it makes your structures more nimble. And there is another way than our inherited structures of multiple committees, and that is simplified accountable structure. It comes from paragraph 247.2 in the discipline when churches are allowed with approval of the district superintendent. So I usually say there's consultation and approval. You need to talk to your DS first, get approval, and if you start now in that process, if you're a smaller church, you might be able to do it by charge conference. It's a conversation with your DS. Um, but with approval, you can move to a alternative leadership structure. The one that our book here with Mission Possible envisions is a single leadership board. And if you note here, that's the one in purple here. You have a charge conference, you have a leadership board that serves, and your leadership board is simultaneously your church council, your trustees, your staff parish, and your finance committee. It does all the governance of the work, all the governance work. You still have a separate nominations committee because that's required by the discipline. It's chaired by the pastor. But all the other executive functions rest in that one board, that one leadership board. Now, notice in this, there are still ministry teams. There's still a team that makes sure that you are, feeding the hungry. There's still a ministry team that may be taking care of the building and fixing the toilets when they run and changing the light bulbs. And you still have a ministry team that works and visits the nursing home. So this board's not in charge of all the ministries doing them. It's in charge of the governance of the church. But and one reason why folks usually like this idea is because there's fewer people needed. I was working with one church, and we did a count. We did a head count on their committee structure. And this is a church that worshiped under 50. But when they counted all the slots to be filled in the nominations report, they had over 60 slots they needed to fill for a church that worshiped 50. That's because they were trying to have, well, we need 9 trustees and we need 9 staff parish. We need 9. You start adding that up, that's a lot of people. And so usually people would show up in one meeting and they'd also be a member of another committee and maybe a member of another committee. And golly, didn't we just vote on this? Well, we did, but that was oh. So this is fewer meetings and fewer people. There is Beyond that motivation, there's some other cool stuff though, and that is a smaller team is more adaptable and creative. Allows you to take on challenges and opportunities by looking at the whole of the church. If you're just the trustees, everything's a property issue. If you're staff parish, well, it's about staffing. If you put all that together in one team, you're able to look at an opportunity through the lens of all those perspectives: the property, the staffing, the financing, all the pieces. To do this, if you imagine your team, you can have 6 to 9 folks plus the pastor. That all the administrative responsibilities are there. And the way I have this imaged, and this talks about it. If you see it here, page 58 of your book, we'll dig into that. If you have your big red book here, you could turn to page 58, and it goes through here in the book what this looks like when it's all put together. And if you imagine for yourself, every person at the table has 4 hats in front of them. And as you're going through the agenda and as you're talking about stuff, you switch hats. You say, okay, everyone, put on your blue finance hat. Okay, let's put on our pastor parish hat, our red hat, our trustee. And we're all trustees. Let's all put on our trustee hats. We're doing, and you switch hats as you go through the meeting. Um, and when I was first doing this and I was creating slides, I was joking with Kay. We ended up not doing it, that we ought to have theme hats for each of these. And so I made a joke that we need like a banker shade for the finance and a hard hat for trustees. And I think my joke was that when it came to Pastor Parish, everyone got Roman centurion battle helmets or something, you know. Um, some of you that served on Pastor Parish, you know what I'm talking about, right? But you guys get the idea. I mean, you switch hats. Now, to do this, one thing that everyone wants to do, and I'm going to say, please don't do it, and that is fall into this trap that's a real big temptation so that you say, well, you know, we're not all really trustees. Let's make Bob the trustee, and let's make Susan the finance person, and you end up with one or two person semi committees on this board. My statement is don't do that. The whole board is cohesively the trustees. The whole board is staff parish. The whole board is finance. And you don't move into that where you have these sort of designated people that are always because that first of all, it's in violation of the discipline. Um, Second, it ruins the cohesiveness you can have with this kind of system. And I do talk about this. I noticed now my slide. It looks like I printed that over it. But in here, it talks about representative specialist. Some of you may be coming to this with a previous version, an older version of simplified structure that has that. My statement to y'all is I've got some really good reasons here in the book why you might want to think of a different path. Because if you're having a little trouble with your system, often that's it. When we do some diagnostics, is that it's not being run with that kind of cohesiveness. Um, and so that's as we move through here. I have a hat I sometimes use that has a little whirly bird with all the colors, and I've got it somewhere in the office. Uh, if once you get really good at this, you start noticing you're wearing all the hats simultaneously. Everyone's wearing a multicolor hat, and you're looking at it as leaders of with the finance, the trustees, the pastor parent, all that stuff in your head as you're leading the church, and you're doing it all in a very holistic way. You're able to use all the resources and perspectives of the church to take advantage of opportunities and to deal with challenges. I'm going to pause here for a second and see if this intro, some of you have heard this intro before. Do you have any kind of questions you want me to answer about that? You can put it in the chat. Or y'all can speak up if you want. Okay, I'm going to go just a little bit further and we'll take another pause. So if I think about, okay, how's this structured now? 6 to 9 people elected by the charge conference, and the people can have multiple jobs. Oh, I went a little too fast on you. Like your lay leader can also be your board chair and be one of the 6. You can double up. Uh, there is some quirky things we could do with that list. I do say 9 board members is the usual plus the pastor. For very small churches, it's sometimes hard to fill 9. And that way, I would suggest doing 6 board members. And that means you have 2 in every class. So, you know, the class of 25, you'll have 2. The class of 26, you'll have 2. The class of 27, you'll have 2 people. And then you rotate your leadership. Now, I know in some small churches that means you rotate right back and start again, and that's okay. You cannot have. Now, here's the thing there's a lot of rules in the discipline about all these committees. Because remember, this is your pastor parish, it's your trustees, it's your finance, your church council. Here's the thing all the rules that apply for each of the committees apply to this group. For instance, trustees all have to be 18. So guess what? Your leadership council If they're going to be trustees, all have to be 18. Your pastor parish has some rules. Like, for instance, no one can be a household member of a staff member. Okay, well, guess what? That means this group, it's your staff parish. So that rule applies. All the rules apply simultaneously because you have all the authority of those four committees. You have all the qualifications and all the requirements of that. Another thing with pastor parish is you can't have two household members on it, on the leadership board. So, spouses cannot serve simultaneously on the board. What I usually say is if you have two highly involved folks, put one on nominations and one on the board. And that makes it okay because that's two separate groups. Um, and again, for smaller churches, you can run two in each class. And a little bit larger churches or mid-sized churches, you can run three in each class. There are ways to add beyond that with your lay member to annual conference and lay leader, but those are variants that are okay. They just need to be thought out. And I can kind of get into those variants a little bit. As we look at that, there are some things that I suggest contemplating. One is how you invite people to serve on a group like this. In the book, I have some downloadable stuff that some and photocopyable stuff on, and you can look there. It's on resource pages at the back, number 6 and 7. I've got suggestions that, what would happen if you're in your church, instead of going and begging people, hey, could you maybe serve? And don't worry, it won't take too much time. And, the way we usually ask people to serve. What if instead you said, hey, I've got a great opportunity for you. We're seeing some special gifts in you for leadership. We'd love for you to apply to be on this leadership board. Can you imagine if we had people apply like a job application? Or what if you had a recommendation system as well? It's not just people applying, but looking in your church and saying, hey, who would you like to recommend to be in a leadership position? And people can recommend others to serve. And then you could even interview them. Your nominations committee could say, we're going to hold some interviews, like job interviews. When little is asked, little is given. I always wonder what we could do differently in nominations if we raise the bar of our expectations and asked a lot of folks when we're asking them to serve, especially in these kinds of roles where they have so much responsibility and authority. So that's one model, one kind of best practice I wanted to share. Another practice is the using work teams. So the first comment I get on this simplified structure board is, how does stuff get done all in one meeting? How can you get all these things accomplished? Because usually we spend an hour or two in each of these committees. Is that a 10-hour meeting? Well, no, no one would want to serve that. Instead, I say, we try to get some work done ahead of time. And an example of that is work teams. And you have your 6 to 9 people on your board, but you have projects you can parse out and say, okay, hey, we need a draft budget. Could Susan and Bill off this board get together with the pastor? And hey, I know that another member of ours, Ann, she has some gifts and she's an accountant in her day job. Maybe her and maybe one of the folks that are involved in one of our ministries with children, and she knows a lot about spending money and our budget for kids. And can the 4 or 5 of you get together and come up with a draft budget? And you bring the draft budget to the board. And all your board then does is maybe finalize it and maybe have questions. And another example is your personnel policies. You don't sit and work out every page of a personnel policy in the group. You get a couple of folks and say, hey, can you take that, work with some folks, and come up with a personnel policy? Um, uh, Another one could be a big plan for a big overall ministry you have in your future. Well, you can send a work team off and say, okay, I need you to come back in 1 month with a plan. Bring your draft. And a work team is a great way to do that because now you're asking people, they don't have to be members or not. And they could be people newer in the church that haven't served on leadership. They could be some folks who have served so often in leadership and they just wanted, hey, I don't need another 3-year term. But man, they sure do know how the church works and they sure are devoted disciples of Jesus. You get some of those experienced leaders, some new folks, some folks off your board, you put them together, they can work a product. bring a draft to the board, and the board doesn't have to recreate it from scratch. They're not starting with a blank page. They're then able to take that and put a final stamp of approval on it and any touches they need to do. That allows a lot of work to get done outside the meeting. And then the board itself then takes that product and is able to work with it. And so my encouragement when you get to an agenda, and I've got a sample of that, is it's never worked on a blank page. Another thing I usually suggest is to make your building maintenance ministry a work team or a ministry team. Some of you have heard me tell this story before. I served a church when the trustee chair, I remember stopping the trustee meeting mid-cycle, and we all went to one of the bathrooms, and the chair of the trustees got his tools out of his truck, and he was like working on the toilet, and we were kind of all watching him work on the toilet, saying, "Good job, Ken." The question was, is that really a trustee function? Trustees are in charge of like dealing with insurance, which nowadays is a big thing. It's a briefcase job. Uh, we need toolbox folks, but they don't have to be on trustees. In fact, the folks that find a lot of fulfillment, changing the lights, fixing the ballast and those lights, fixing the plumbing, all that kind of stuff, or maybe working with somebody if they need, we need some repairs done. Uh, they don't need to be on a 3 year rotation, and they don't want to sit in a bunch of meetings. They're called to fix stuff. So that's a good opportunity to be a building maintenance team. No term limits. They're just called to that ministry the same way your food ministry folks are. And that way you can separate out what the toolbox team is versus the trustees, which is more briefcase work. Another best practice is to prepare ahead of time for meetings. So how many of y'all been to those meetings when you have your agenda, you have your finances, everything is laid out on a credenza when you walk into the parlor and you grab your big old stack of papers that got photocopied and you sit down 5 minutes before the meeting and you're ruffling through them saying, okay, what do I need to read for this? That's not fair to your team. And my suggestion, if you're going to run this kind of structure, is get everything out a week ahead of time. Get your agenda. If you have new people coming and how you're connecting with them. Get your financials. Get your any kind of goals, any kind of bids that need to be voted on. Send that out in an email ahead of time, or if your folks don't do email, and just a packet stapled up on Sunday. Hey, pick up your packet before the meeting next week. Pick up your packet. You've got your packet. They can read it ahead of time. And then when you get to the meeting, you're not shuffling through seeing papers for the first time. What you're able to do is just, vote on stuff and talk about stuff because everyone at the meeting is expected to have read everything and be prepared. That right there will shave off at least 30, 45 minutes of your meeting. That one piece, everyone being prepared ahead of time. And it makes it a lot easier to just go through and get things done because everyone is read ahead. My wife, bless her heart, was part of United Methodist Committee. When it came time for the minutes, they read the minutes. And when I say read the minutes, they read every single word of the minutes, every single word before it could be approved. Right there, the minutes themselves took over 15, almost 20 minutes of the meeting before they got to the first agenda item. You can imagine what that does to folks. There's a much better way to go about stuff. And that goes then to the agenda. My suggestion is to have a functional agenda. And I have a couple of different part versions of this. I have one that I particularly designed truly for small churches in this. And the idea is you have some fiduciary work, like, okay, we get the minutes done, we get a consent calendar. You can just work through a bunch of stuff really quickly. Uh, and then you move to your big issues. I'll give you an example. We had a meeting here at Fort Smith, and instead of going through and all these reports, have you ever been to one of those meetings, just endless reports, one after another? A whole bunch of reports that could have been an email. Instead of endless reports, we sent out all the stuff ahead of time. Any ministry reports were sent out ahead of time. Our minutes were sent out ahead of time. And then the chair got up there and said, okay, does anything need to be pulled out of the consent calendar? We got the trustee report. We got staff parish report. We got a ministry team report. We got our minutes. Anything need to be pulled out? No? Good. Do you vote to approve the consent calendar? We received all the reports. We received the minutes all in one vote. And then when we got to the agenda, we had three things that we needed to talk about, like big, worthy, God-sized dreams to talk about. We did not waste our time on the minor stuff. We get that done with the consent calendar and moved on. So much stuff we do is reporting stuff that, well, over half the committee already knows because they were there, and we're just reporting stuff we already knew. That's a meeting that could have been an email. And so we talk about what we need to talk about and read and approve what needs to be read and approved. And so my suggestion is you have a basic agenda structure like this. In this agenda, if you notice, we have an executive session because remember, your committee is staff parish. And, have you ever seen a school board go to executive session? That means you're talking about personnel issues, right? If you do any personnel issues, if you do any legal work, you go to executive session. If you're not a voting member of the committee, you need to be excused. You do your executive session, and then you move on. Another piece I have in here is communication. I've never heard a church that said, man, everyone knows what's going on. Our communication works great. I've never been a part of one, never heard of one. Everyone needs to know more stuff. So I suggest closing every meeting with communications. Amy, you probably like that, communications, right? And say, okay, who needs to know what and who needs to share it? And so you close by saying, and that allows you to make sure, oh, I'm supposed to do this, whose assignments? And then you say, okay, does this need to be talked about from the pulpit? Who's going to share it? Does this need to be talked about in a newsletter or a special email? Or maybe you have a monthly from the leadership team that is shared around each of the laity and they do a little article. Great. However it needs to be shared, make sure you close by saying how it needs to be shared. And the communication might be not to share from, it might be we need to talk to the congregation, listen. So we have a big thing coming up in our church. So we scheduled it. We said, okay, our communications plan is on April 6th, our church is going to have a town hall where we're going to invite the whole church to come and we're going to talk about some stuff, have a family meeting. So sometimes your communication plan is not just what you're going to email out, but it's like, what do we need to hear from our members? And that's part of the plan too. So those are some best practices. And I've got, others in the book, but I want to pause here and get some questions. Do we have any questions? I have some other, phases of transitioning to this, but I know some of y'all are already using it, and I'd love to hear, maybe you brought in, some questions from having used this program.
I got a question.
Yes, sir.
Charles Hartwick here, Cornerstone. How do you avoid the problem or the perceived problem? The small group of people that run the church
Okay.
take over the whole thing, and
Sure.
that'll be the end of independent or democratic involvement.
Yeah, that's a great question, Charles. So I love that question because you're asking the right thing there, and that is, that those ideas perception. So here's the thing on that. Here's what I've noticed. A couple things. One is you need a strong nominations process. And if you're in a mid or larger size church, you need to do good rotations of leadership. That's number one. Number two, you need to be scheduling in regular times to listen. There is a danger here of exactly what you describe. And that is, it would be easy if this team, because you're spending a lot of time together, you're doing spiritual study, you're doing research, it'd be really easy for that group to feel so good being together, you start isolating. So you need to go out of your way to be in the communications and listening mode. And what I say is, well, if 4 committees are being compressed into one, you probably need to do 4 times the amount of listening and talking to others than you had just to stay even. And you need to be incredibly transparent. And that is why I say to conclude every meeting with a lot of transparency, a lot of sunlight, and say, okay, here's what we did. Here's what we voted on. Here's, you know, if we, here's what's going on, church, and inviting people to contact you and creating some space for that. And just create a listening space. And I really mean that. It's like you may want to get town halls like a couple times a year. And then another thing is when you do charge conference, because by discipline, that little group could be your charge conference. I say, don't do that. Instead of a charge conference, I would ask if your DS would let you to do a church conference so everyone gets a vote. So when you do your annual church conference, that means who elects these people is done by vote of the whole body. And that would create some larger space there. Um, just to have more voices in that selection process. So those are some of the ways, but what you described is very true. That if without a lot of intentionality, something like this could move into that model of being isolated. And that's why I'm saying you have to do all these things and plan ahead all these different ways to make sure that doesn't happen. And so, for instance, I would say if you're doing this model, when you have your first meeting in January, you're already planning your town halls for the year and get them on the calendar. And they're booked. You don't know when your charge/church conference could be, but you can plan some other things. You know, you plan something after Easter, you plan another one in the fall or summer or whenever. I mean, just kind of figure out when you want to plan them that fit your cycle and make that just part of the rhythm of your church. And it could be not only a time to listen, it's also a time to build momentum and get some buy-in. And so those are some of my suggestions because what you describe is very real. Thank you. What are some more? Stark, yes, sir.
Blake, because of looking at your agenda, the going into executive session by this board, do I assume correctly that the actual board meeting, except for executive session for personnel, is open to all the church members?
That is correct, yes.
All right, thank you.
Mhm. That is, yeah, yep. And the other thing is with the leadership packet, I saw one church that I can't remember where they were. They put everything but their executive session parts. They sent it out to the whole church. They said, "Here's our finances." Here, they did their leadership packet, and they said it's open information except for our staff parish or legal work, which we kept as a separate email. And they just had a little button you could click when they send out announcements. Oh, by the way, our group's meeting. If you'd like to read our packet, here's what our packet looks like. And that was trying to be radically transparent. And people could read. They want to read the report from the mission team or the trustee, the building maintenance team, or whatever ministry report or the draft, the financials. Have at it, and made sure it was a public meeting. And then when you move to executive session, you really had to do that. And the reason on the agenda I put it there is that this is the staff parish committee. This is Pastor Parish. And every session you meet, you need to pause, go to executive session, and have some just talk time with your pastor. And you need to talk about staffing. If you have a staff, you need to do that work. And because here's the thing, I've seen churches that only did staff parish work, much less executive session, when there was a problem. And my suggestion is you do executive session every month, whether you need it or not. And even if all you say is, okay, well, what's the plan for staff reviews if you have staff, that kind of thing. Go ahead and just work through it. And is there anything we need to know, Pastor? And here's what we're kind of hearing, Pastor. And do that time every time so that when something does happen, and we're people, so stuff happens, you've built up a relationship you need and the strength of that when you move to executive session, we have something we really need to talk about in executive session, you're ready for it and you've built the groundwork. So thank you. Yes. What other questions we got?
Blake, we've got one in the chat
Oh,
from
okay.
Consuela Morris.
Okay. Um, uh, that's not popping up for me. Can you share it with me?
The question is concerning job descriptions as defined in the Book of Discipline, like
Uh-huh.
finance secretary and treasurer. Do these positions become part of a work team that reports to the board, or do those positions disappear?
No, that is a great question, and I love the way you asked it. They are closer to a staff position. They're unpaid staff, really. And so we do not have those items. When you look at the list, you go, where's the treasurer and finance secretary? Well, in our recommendation, they're not on this. And instead, they operate more like staff. And what I mean by that is they're functional positions. Now they might be paid, they might be unpaid. I've seen it, in everything in churches. But they're a position that is technical. And so they do that work. Now, what they do need to do is they need to turn in appropriate reports to the board. And then, depending on the nature of things, you may have them Zoom in or visit with your board for the first little bit of a meeting, or maybe on a quarterly basis if there's questions. Otherwise, if everyone's able to understand and read the reports and it's being interpreted well and notes are in there and all that, you can just operate by turning in written stuff and receiving it and all's well. And then if you need to have a conversation, you have a conversation. I might recommend you have a deep dive conversation a couple times a year with the finance secretary and the treasurer, and you can build that into the schedule and do a deep dive, and you can kind of look at your rhythm and flow. But generally speaking, you treat those positions like staff positions. And that means you get reports from them and you invite them in as guests as needed. Okay. Any more questions there? Okay, I'm going to show y'all a few more items here and let me, okay. So, uh, in addition to this agenda here, I also in the book, and you can look on page 181 has this as a chart. I have an annual rhythm flow that you could take and adapt to your congregation. And if you notice in this rhythm flow, it shows some ministry accountability stuff. It talks about a retreat. It talks about, it's time to do evaluations. You know, there's you've all seen the youth minister who does the object lesson of putting the big rocks in first. You got to tell you got to put the big rocks in, then the small rocks. These are some of the big rocks. And if you notice, every meeting every month, the big rocks are a little different based upon what time of year you're in. So you put these big rocks in, and you may have some unique to your church, and then the other stuff falls in place. But if you notice here is some town hall meetings pre-programmed in, some financial deep dives pre-programmed in, some state of the church stuff. You just build that into the plan, and then you start publishing those dates so everyone knows when to expect things. And that's part of the transparency too. Now, when we talk about communication, again, there's many different ways to do communication. Leadership board reporting after every meeting, newsletter articles. One thing I love to do is commission all the leaders every year. And so everyone sees them come up in January and have hands laid on these leaders. And so they're not just names on a page, they're real life people. And you're praying for them as leaders, and you do that every year. Uh, and then as we kind of move on, there are some phases to this structure. This book is actually built into this structure. So the first bit of the book is about discerning. and then we have a section on equipping, and then we have a section on implementing. The book was written so you start with the theory and you move all the way to the implementation. And so we designed the book with these sections in mind. And if I were to break it down, I mean, we can break it down. And here's the to-do items as you move through the year, if you're moving to this structure. Now, again, notice in here, as a former superintendent, I'll say it's important to consult with your superintendent because that's a conversation that needs to happen. And sometimes the best thing to say is, well, maybe not now. This might be a future idea. And that's okay. So that's a question that y'all have to discuss. Okay. I'm going to pause here again and take more questions. And I can go backwards and show you some, if you had a question about one of those slides, I'm happy to do it. Some of you may have been using this for a while and you learned some stuff that was unique to your church, or maybe you got some, some big potholes you fell in moving to this structure. That's understandable. It's a little different. And maybe you have a question about those, you got yourself into a pothole. I'm happy to answer questions about that.
Blake,
Yes,
John
sir.
Gibson.
Hey there.
But my question is, are you going to make this PowerPoint available to all of us who are registered?
I sure will. I will get this PowerPoint to Amy Azale, and she will get it out to everybody.
Good deal.
Yeah. Oh, I see a question. It says in January, elect trustee chair. Oh, you found it. I love that you found that. Okay. So Sharon Scott asked, it says in January, elect trustee chair. So here's the thing. One of the things, Kay and I, when we wrote this book, we were we really worked hard to keep everything within the book of discipline. And that's one reason why superintendents and bishops from all over the country continue to call us, is there's a lot of simplified models out there from different denominations and all that. We actually built ours for United Methodist. And so we made sure that we followed all the rules. Now, I will say we went to a very open interpretation of some of the rules, but we made sure we followed the rules. And the discipline requires that the trustee chair is elected in January. So what we say is, okay, so in your January meeting, one of your 9 people need to be elected as the trustee chair. Now, what we recommend is it is your board chair. And your board chair has been selected and approved by charge conference. If it's, Jane Doe, well, we say, okay, in January, Jane Doe probably needs to be elected the trustee. Now, legally, it could be any of the 9 or the 6, depending on how big your group is. But you do have to actually elect them in the minutes and put that designation down. And the reason is every church is either an incorporated or unincorporated legal entity. And that trustee chair needs to be in the minutes as having been elected because just legal purposes having to do with a million different things. So that's just a process you'll have to do. And we put that in the agenda as one of the agenda items you just got to do every year and go through the motion. Great question. Man, that was fine print stuff. I love that. What are some others?
Blake, can you hear me?
Yeah. Hey there.
Hey, okay, so I must have a different version of this book than you are using because whatever that last slide was, and I think it had something to do with taking 2 years to get this going, something that I don't have
Oh,
that.
yeah, it takes 2 years, but 1 year to move into it.
I don't know if
Yeah,
this is-
that's it. But the second year is the first year of using the system. And you know what I mean? You get it takes about a year, or at least half a year to move and to have it voted in. But let's be honest. We've been using the inherited multi-committee system or whatever system you've been using for probably decades. Life is not a light switch. You don't just switch into a new leadership structure with a different kind of culture automatically. So that first year is a culture building year. where as you move through the year, you're always reflecting. You're building new, what I call guiding principles, which I didn't even talk about. You're confirming stuff you need in a leadership covenant. Oh, and by the way, this book, the Blue Book, has a really cool leadership covenant. I may have it on my website. I put my website information in the chat. I'm going to try to copy that. So I'll say that first year, in so many ways, is a learning year. As you're doing it, as you're leading, you're also learning. And you're learning how to do leadership differently. You're learning how to do work teams. You're learning what it means to be really working with a building maintenance team, and the trustees not also, grabbing their hard hats and their tool belts. And so as you live into it, just know that first year is going to take a lot of adjustments. And my recommendation is bring the book to the meetings because they'll be like, how are you supposed to do this? Well, we wrote 300 pages or so. I imagine we probably had your answer in the book somewhere. It's amazing. We took one paragraph of the discipline, made 300 pages on it, but there we are. But as you learn through that year, just know it's going to take a lot of adjustments. Sark.
So,
I'm sorry, Heather. Yes. Follow
so,
up.
so you tell your DS that you feel like the church needs to move in this direction.
Here, I'll put up the slide when you're saying that. Yeah.
You have conversations with him or her
Uh-huh.
and discern that, and
Yep.
then start involving your leadership.
What I always require when I was superintending and when I still do consulting is I don't want just the pastor. I want the pastor and a few key lay leaders to have that conversation or at least to sign off on it.
Yeah.
Because no pastor needs to change the governance system or even start the process by themselves.
Okay.
It's not good. It's just not a good look. Let's put it that way.
Yeah.
And so I always say, okay. And so there's actually in the book, there's a checklist for initial conversation and for a formal request. In the initial conversation, I say, who are the lay people and who are the leaders that were involved in this request? And I want to know them by title.
Because
And
you,
yeah,
because you mentioned if you have 16 spots to fill in a church that's worshiping 50, that's a good clue that this might be a good direction to go. And if you
yeah,
have a group of people that have voted on the same thing in 2 different meetings, and they're like, didn't we already talk about this? Didn't we already
right.
do this? That's another good clue. That's the other question I have is, what is the more lengthy list of clues that would say that you could use as a tool in telling people, hey, we all probably need to think about this as a church?
Right. So if you, first of all, a couple things. If you look on page 33, if you're in the book, what you'll see is the initial consultation page. And you can literally photocopy that and fill it in and send it to your DS. And so that has some basic, here is, we have a version called a SWOT analysis. And here that is, you can kind of see here. This is on page 27 if you're using the red book. And it's about assessing what's the strength, weaknesses, opportunities, threats of your current structure. And then what would it look like if you move to a new one? And we had a list of common reasons why. And they're listed out as efficiency, alignment with your mission, trying to stay focused, and then have that overall accountability, and then how adaptable is your leadership. And so those are all good reasons to want to switch over.
Okay.
Yeah. I saw Stark, and then I see one online. Yes, sir.
Blake, 2 quick questions. Take them in which order or not that you prefer. And it's somewhere in the book probably, which Amazon delivered to me at noon, and I haven't had a chance to read.
Alrighty.
Would this process allow for virtual meetings and virtual voting by the Simplified board?
Yes, if allowed in your state. Yeah, and it is in Arkansas. My suggestion is set some ground rules for that in your guidelines or your covenant. And usually the model, the kind of models I've used around that is if folks, if you know you're going to be voting on something, you tell people and you kind of get like, I did that on Sunday. We said, hey, is it okay if we send you a name and you vote up or down? They said, yeah, that's great. Good. That's in the minutes. If not, you need to leave space if it's an up or down vote on something, to someone to say, I'm sorry, I need a meeting for this. And we need to do a
Okay.
called meeting. And so there needs to be a way to both close out the voting, like please answer within 48 hours or whatever, or please ask if you need to talk about, we need to have a meeting, say it. And we need, if two people ask for a meeting, we'll have, whatever your plan is for that. Set those ground rules up before you do it. And that way, that's your policy.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And
The
my
one thing
second
I
one
would
is,
say is this is a group that needs to be well connected. And if you can do Zooms and do that, that's okay. But this is a group that needs to have some relational energy around it as just a trust factor. So we probably want to do in person when possible.
okay. I was just concerned about, smaller numbers and, one or two, absentees, even unavoidable, well, I don't know if it's a Methodist quorum or not. Okay.
Whoever shows up is the quorum except for items that involve trustee work. And
Okay.
any items
And
that have those legal restrictions under trustees would need a majority present.
Okay. And my other little question was coaches, the coaching process. I have the impression that maybe the district superintendent, upon meeting with the group from the church, might suggest or offer a list of options as far as certified coaches.
Yeah, I don't know if the Arkansas Conference has certified coaches at this point. I know how to contact people who do that kind of work. And Kay runs, my co-author runs a coaching program, but I could always connect you with folks who have done it before for conversations. But I don't think we have any certified coaches here. Um, this model is still actually kind of new for us. We had kind of a Wild West model earlier. Everyone kind of did a lot of things. So we're trying to bring it under a little more clarity of expectation when you're using this system. Some conferences went the other way. They did not allow any simplification until they had a highly structured set of expectations with the coaching system, and then it was a different deployment of this kind of model.
All right, exclusive of any travel or lodging, anything like that to get somebody in, say from out of state. Do
Mhm.
you have a sense of what the charges might be to a
I,
congregation?
I do not, but if any of y'all are interested in that, I'm happy to connect you with Kay Cotan, who is connected with those folks. And so I put my email there. If any of you are interested in that, I'm happy to get you connected. I do not coach churches in Arkansas. That's kind of I don't really coach local churches except for a few small. I only do a little consulting, and it's usually out of state. And I'm trying to keep my lives a little separate here. So I don't do that, but I know Kay knows folks who do that.
Thank you.
Certainly. I see a question from Dan. How do we avoid the pitfalls and overly bureaucratic leadership making all decisions to an accountable structure? That's a great question. So, one of the models that we have in the Methodism is it's really easy for us to go bureaucratic, and that's one of the issues with all the multiple committees, is to have all these layers of committees that everything has to go through. My hope on this model is that you have a nimble decision-making body. We are not doing vote after vote after vote after vote after vote, but different committees. And instead, when you make a decision, you make a decision. The other thing I really like about this model is when we use, and I didn't really go into this, is what's called guiding principles. And that is, once you make a decision, you try to hand off that decision to others. For instance, there are churches that every party that ever wants to use the church, they need to go to the trustees and have it approved. Well, what if you built in your guiding principles that if the request to use the church building fits these three criteria, the whoever answers the phone can just approve it and put it on the calendar, or the pastor can, or whoever's designated can just make, okay, that fits the criteria. So your board is only looking at the exceptions to the rule, not the normal process. You can do that with expenses as well. You can build in guiding principles. So the building maintenance team, they're approved to up to, you know, 100 or 500 bucks. And if they need more, they have to talk to somebody. If it's over 1,000 or 2,000, they need bids. So you build in some structure, and then you give away decisions. Because once you make the decision once, the question is, do I need to keep on making this decision, or can we hand this decision off to others? Now that we've set sort of the parameters, how can we allow then those other just to get handled by other folks? It could be staff, it could be laity, pastor, whoever can make those decisions. The pastor in this is they're part of sort of the executive branch in this, and so they're journeying with they work with the board for visioning. They're partners in the visioning and vision casting, and they also, if you look at, let me kind of show you this model again. And they also uh, have a management role over the staff and lay ministry team leaders. And so part of the accountability is the pastor is accountable to the leadership board, because part of the leadership board's accountability. And so the pastor, you know, shares that accountability runs through the pastor with these different ministries. And now in small churches, I have a different chart, because sometimes with part-time, less than full-time clergy appointments, you have to kind of make adjustments. And so I have a different way to describe it. And I did that in this blue book for that, just to make some allowances for the reality of less than full-time clergy and how you have to do leadership. So that's some of the ways we've kind of done that model. I see some other questions. How many churches use SAS? I'll say this. When I was in Central District, we probably had maybe a quarter of our churches. By the time I moved to Northwest District, I had over 100 churches. About 50 of them were using simplified accountable structure in some version. And I will say this: most of them weren't actually simplified accountable structure. They were just simple structures. And we needed to work on the accountability. And we needed to make sure they were disciplinary. As I said, it was kind of Wild West when we started this. People were just sort of doing it. And part of my job back when I was having that other gig when I was superintendent is making sure whatever model they were using actually conformed to the Book of Discipline. I had some best practices and recommendations to run it more efficiently and better, but I didn't really do that job when I was superintending. I just needed it to be legal. And so oftentimes we had to talk and kind of do some adjustments to make sure the simple models folks were using were actually United Methodist disciplinarily appropriate legal systems. So that was a challenge. Um, okay, I'm looking there. Any more questions? I try to answer all the questions on the chat. Amy, where are we on things? I don't actually know how long this thing's supposed to last.
We are actually set to go for 2 hours.
Oh,
And
wow. Okay.
so yeah.
Okay. I can do that too.
Okay.
What are the questions y'all have? Okay, I'm going to do one more piece. Let me grab another slide deck here. I want to show you all one more thing, and then I'll see if there's any more questions, and then we'll probably wrap up in a little bit. Let me pull another chart up. So a couple of things I talked about, and since we have a little time, I'd like to dig into just a bit, and that is those guiding principles and the and the covenant. And with that, let me just sort of pull up a chart here. I'm going to start with let me start with this actually. Okay. So The question I get often is trying to divide up between ministry teams and governing boards. And this is something for y'all to use. And I talk about on page 65 there. This is something y'all can use even if you don't simplify your structures. It's a idea I got from Dan Inwitzel at Resurrection. And that's the image of a bicycle when you talk about governance and ministry. So on a bicycle, there's 2 points of connection. There's the handlebars and there's the pedals. Governance is about the handlebars. That's your boards and your committees. That's if you have a simplified structure, that's that. If you have trustees and staff parish, all those committees that are elected positions that have governing roles in the life of the church, they steer where you go. Your pedals are about moving somewhere. It's about momentum. Those are your ministry teams. My hope for churches is that you elect your governing officers. Ministry teams should be selected based upon giftedness and calling. We don't have a term limit on our calling. They're not a 3-year term. My wife's a good example. Her calling, her excitement is always children's ministry, has been for years. She'll be in the pedaling of children's ministry. When our kids got bigger and they moved into youth and all that, she stayed in children's ministry. Why? Because that's her calling, that's her love. Other folks have said, fixing the building is a ministry. You don't need to be elected to do it. That's just your calling and your giftedness. And so we really encourage folks to leave the ministry teams kind of open-ended and let them be based on that calling. The governing officers are elected. And so right off the bat, they have a different set of expectation. Along with that, when you think of governing officers, what are they responsible for? Policies, the resources of the church or facilities, and all the fiduciary legal stuff you're responsible for, insurance and book of discipline and all that. And in that, I use the image of guiding principles. I shared a few of them. Notice I never said that the church leadership should be involved in every decision and manage every decision life of the church. That's what the pastor has as a main role for, and the ministry team leaders. And if you're big enough to have staff, you have some staff. Instead, the leadership board sets the playing field. There's the book of discipline and policies or the fence. So the ball doesn't go rolling out in the parking lot and in the street. You can also set guiding principles. You notice all the lines here in this, whatever ball game this is, whatever game this is, you see these lines. They tell you what your spending limits could be guiding principles and things like that. Really what you're trying to do is help everybody stay in their lane. Most of conflict in the church comes from people not staying in their lane. And so my suggestion is to be really clear on your lanes. Now you may say, I'm a small church. We don't need to have all that description. And here's what I'll say. Smaller churches really need some of this description because oftentimes we have really blurry responsibilities because we have to do so much of the work ourselves. You may be counting the money on Sunday and you're involved in the ministry team and you sing in the choir and you're on the board. And that's a lot of roles. That's a lot of hats you're wearing. And so when you move and you do this kind of work as a governing officer, yeah, you sing in the choir, but that doesn't mean you get to bump up the choir's budget by 500%. You have to think about the whole church. And so you need to take off the choir robe, put it over, and put on your leadership hat. And everyone, you have to be intentional in staying in your lane because when you leave that board, you're still the board, but you're doing other stuff too. And so some systems we have to help out in that is not only guiding principles, which are kind of how you go about it, but also I really encourage folks to have a leadership covenant. I've got a sample in the Blue Book. I believe I put it on my webpage. You can download it, the whole chapter. I have some basic rules of the road. Now you can write your own and that's great. There's these 5 bullet points. Decisions are made by the board members who show up. Leadership board members are disciples and fiduciary officers. We need to speak the truth in love, balance, transparency, and confidentiality, and we're a leadership board with a unified voice. Now, within that, I've actually broken these 5 points down. And so each one of these 5 bullet points, I mean, I really got into it, has, you can have, your quorum rules and teleconference and Zoom meetings, start to ask questions about that, or executive session rules. You can do these sub points and define it. I've got it broken down for every one of these and what each of these can mean. And it's a multi-page. I think I put most of that online. If not, I can send you something if you're interested. Happy to. Or you can get it out of the blue book for small churches. But the smaller the church, actually, I think you need to spend some time on this kind of work. And it may feel overly, I don't know, bureaucratic or organized, but I'll just say this. Doing a little bit of this work when you're setting up your pattern and your expectations may save you a lot of headaches and heartaches later. When the heat's going up on an issue or a challenge or a family thing, it's nice to have these set aside rules for the road you've already agreed on and not try to figure it out in the heat of the moment. And it can save a lot of friendships too. So I wanted y'all to see that, that's, you can tell I've got all these sub points. Oh, here we go. No parking lot conversations. Man, how do Methodists get things done without parking lots, right? Things like that. So I encourage y'all to imagine that kind of work too, because if you're having a smaller board, you need to be really intentional about everybody staying in their lane and doing the right stuff and staying appropriate, because that's a lot less people, and a lot of the checks and balances are those that you'll hold each other to. Okay, I'm going to put a pause on that and see if that brought up any more questions. I see this, one of our small churches, Thornton UMC, has been using a version of this model. And okay, yeah, okay. Yeah. I think you're right. It would be easy to kind of make a few shifts. If you haven't been doing this exact model, there's a few shifts you can make. They'll probably make it work a little smoother for you. Any other questions here? Okay. I do want to say on blakebradford.org, if there's a simplified structure tab, I've got some links to some stuff. I've got a free video of, what was it? A sample leadership board meeting. It's one that my buddy Kay did. And we showed what happens when you go off course and you get out of your lane, and it's got one of those where it goes, and we try to get back, and it's a Zoom meeting, and you can kind of see the people, and they all had sort of a speaking roles and all that. So some of our friends up in Missouri did that video, so it is available on my website. If you want to just kind of see a sample of what this looks like, it's a little bit longer video. There's also some other resources. I see someone asking about the book for small churches. Amy may have some of the connections on that. Also, there's some links to some of the major sellers on that kind of thing. I I do think moving to this model is great for some churches. I will say it's not great for every church. And so Heather asked a question about, what are things to look for? That's a good question. I'll say here's also some things to look for that might mean you need to wait. And let me share a few of those. One is if there's some existing trust issues in the church, it's probably good to work on those first. This model does remove some of the safety systems. The way I framed it is, if your church has been using an axe to cut wood, this is handing you a chainsaw. It's duct taping the trigger, and it's taking off that little cover and going, go at it. And man, you can get through some wood quick, but it is not as safe because things can move really fast. And so I will say that if you need a little more safety and because of trust issues, maybe you need to hold off and maybe move to the accountable leadership and start doing the covenant, doing the guiding principles, doing the packet of leadership, having the building, do some of the accountable leadership stuff. And then if as it feels good and you're building that trust in, having the town hall meeting, act like you're doing some of that, then simplification and reducing from 4 administrative committees to 1 leadership board, that becomes really easy. The hard work is not changing the numbers of the board. The hard work is changing the culture and the conversation around the table, moving from management to governance and strategic leadership. That's the hard thing. So start doing those other accountability pieces, and then you can work into that. That's one of my learnings along the way. Okay, any final questions there that y'all got? Any of y'all using this and have any testimonies about it, either good or bad or any of that? I'd love to hear it.
Blake, John Gibson again.
Hey, sir.
We started last month, so we're newbies
I get you.
and really are really just getting our feet wet. So
You bet. You bet.
don't have much to say.
Well, this first year, John, is going to be a learning year. And
Yeah.
so give yourself space to learn. One of the things I would say, and this is really, it's so easy, and I've noticed that even myself and my team, it's really easy for us to skip past the spiritual formation and the learning aspects you need to build into agendas and just, oh, we need to move, let's move on to stuff. But here's my thing. You can do that time that you do in spiritual work, in prayer work and devotion, sharing devotion around the table, different person in charge every month. That time you spend grabbing it could be a blog post or a podcast, or maybe you want to work on a book all year or something like that. Learning time, that's important stuff. That is, in the old Stephen Covey, it's the old sharpening your axe stuff, right? And once you get really good and you have this spiritual formation learning, it'll make the other stuff go better. But I will tell you, it is really tempting to say, oh, we've already been to church today. Let's skip that. And don't do it. And don't expect your pastor to do the devotional every time. That is something that needs to be shared, both the learning and the spiritual formation parts. That is something that needs to be shared around the table, because every person around the table is a disciple of Jesus that's called, is leading, and has something that God needs them to share with the rest of the group. And so I'd say really invest in that time that first year. Make that one of your holy habits, because if you don't do it that first year, guess what? You'll never do it later because you set up your habits. I see a question. Would you advise a church who had issues with disaffiliation to work on trust issues first? The answer is yes. If your church has been through a hard disaffiliation thing, you need to spread leadership and voting across the board to as many committees as possible to build in a lot of safeties. Keep on using an axe, not the chainsaw. Work on that other stuff. Start doing accountable leadership. And when it feels like it's time, if you want to switch, it's an easy switch. And you talk to your DS and you go from there. But otherwise, I would say Barbara, you pegged it right there. Let's work on that trust stuff first, because y'all been through most churches who've been through that, and I know this from experience. Some of that felt that really pushed on our trust buttons, and some of us still have some kind of traumatic response about it. And work on that stuff and be very loving and caring, and do a lot of listening. So thank you for lifting that up. I appreciate it. Any other things? I'll ask Amy. Amy, you've heard me do this a few times. You probably could have done this one yourself. Is there anything that you noticed? Because man, I've never seen one get around the conference like you do, talking with folks. I love it. You're always talking with folks who are all over the state and really around the country. Has there been some questions that have been popping up from your experience, or maybe some learnings along the way that might be helpful for, I can help with, or maybe with the group?
Well, I'll share that, one of the things that when I visit with folks about the simplified structure, one of the biggest game changers for people is the creating of the agenda. Um,
Mm.
and having an agenda and the having everything due a week before the meeting, having it due and having it distributed a week before the meeting. I've had a couple of questions about just, structural, systemic questions about, how do we do, what's the first thing we do? Well, you've answered that. You visit with your DS. You visit with your leadership team first. You have your core laity, and you decide that this is something that it is the right time, and then you visit with your DS. And usually I'll give a plug for our DSs. Usually that's the first step if you're wanting to make any kind of big change like that. That's usually the first step.
Mhm. Yep.
Always. That's always usually, your first step
Yeah.
there. So yeah, having an agenda,
Uh-huh.
sticking to the agenda, and having reports a week before the meeting, game changers. Absolute game changers.
That's super. Well, I tell you, it's been a while since I was in a local church. I was out doing other stuff for 9 years. One of the things I learned coming back is some stuff I learned actually at the cabinet, and is in my current church, every United Methodist Church in Arkansas has access to arumc.org's Gmail system and file storage systems. Y'all know that? It's part of, you have a Google Workspace you have access to. And if you use Gmail, it makes it real easy. And so, what we started doing here is we created a file for the leadership board, and we've created a file folder for every meeting, and we take a copy of the agenda and put it in like a template, and it's the same agenda every time, and you just change the subjects under it, but it's the same basic structure. And that way we don't forget to do communications, we don't forget to do spiritual, we just put the different names in, and we make a copy of that for the minutes, and someone can type in the minutes live on the Gmail, and we drop all the attachments. Like, here's the finance reports, drop it in the folder. Here's the reports from all the different ministry teams, drop it in the folder, and we share that folder with the whole board, and that way everyone can come and look at it. They can even make comments on it between when they get it to the meeting. They can say, hey, I want to learn more about this, or I have a question about this. They can write comments, and by the time we get to the meeting, everyone can look at it and it's there. And then we have a permanent file for the minutes for the meeting and all the attachments all in a folder ready to go. And we can look like 3 years ago and find a file now. It's designed for that. And every one of the great gifts of the Arkansas Conference is everyone gets access to that kind of technology, churches big and small. Some places would spend a lot of money for that. And it
Yes,
is something that the conference provides to every church.
that's
And
right.
that is cool.
Yeah, indeed. And if anyone has questions about that, please reach out to me. I'm going to put my email in the chat. I would also say that one of the beauties, I mean, I would say the beauty of a simplified structure is that you get valuable time to spend on ministry, and to
Hmm.
spend on dreaming, and to spend on asking what's next. And so often we're so bogged down by the very important systemic work and the governing structure, which we have to do. But when you finally get to the point where you are operating smoothly using the simplified structure, you will be amazed and you are going to be able to experience such authentic joy because you have time to plan, to pray, to dream, and yet you're still getting all of your business done. And I have a question, Blake,
Yeah.
before we go. I was thinking about this and I wanted to ask your thoughts. Barbara had asked about the disaffiliation and about trust issues and,
Mhm.
the timing. I was wondering if maybe um, if they discussed the sharing of report. I mean, keep all of your different committees, but what would it look like if, just as kind of like a baby step, if you asked each of your chairpersons to share their reports with everyone, share the past agenda, the minutes, whatever it is they're going to be proposing, to go ahead and share that and get it out to people a week before, as a matter of transparency, as a matter of giving people a chance to study your words, and so that they can then come to the meeting and be prepared to have a conversation. I am wondering if they don't have to wait to do that, to just,
Mhm.
if they could go ahead and embrace that practice as promoting a more
Accountable.
authentic,
Yeah.
honest,
Mhm.
trusting way of conducting business.
I think you're right. Every church should be doing accountable leadership. Some churches need to be doing a simplified accountable leadership, but every church needs to be doing accountable leadership. That means publishing stuff, being really transparent. Now, yeah, staff parish, you got to do some stuff. I know there's some legal issues and property issues. You got it. There's some executive session stuff. Sure. So appropriate confidentiality, but make it a core value to be really transparent. And that just helps everybody in the system. And it also trusts the whole church because someone may have an idea, a connection, a network, a coworker, or whatever that has the answer we've been looking for, that Jesus gave them that answer. And once you publish, they go, oh, I didn't know you needed help with that. Oh, I know who you need to talk to. And they can make that connection that we never would have made if we kept everything bubbled up in our own little silo. And so I love that. I think start practicing the agenda, a standard template agenda. Start practicing the publication and transparency. Start, being really clear about what is the handlebars and what's the pedals. Start going and do the building maintenance team. If you have staffing, it's a little bit different. But if you're not a staff church with staff custodians, go in and do the building maintenance team and start having your trustees be real trustees and not only, separate out the tool belts and the briefcase work. Uh, those are all ways that you can start practicing that accountable leadership. And once you start moving into that culture of accountable leadership, trust issues will drop, and then it'll be easier. It'll be so easy. It'll be like people be clamoring to shift over to the simplified, if that's what you're called to do, um, because you've already built that kind of trust, and you've already created all this accountability in the system, so your church is functioning like it never functioned before. Um, so I'm really excited for your churches. I'm hoping that you see this as an opportunity, not just to, we make jokes about moving the wheelchairs, not wheelchair, moving the chairs on the Titanic and all these kind of things. No, no, no. I think what you're trying to do is build a new kind of conversation around the table. So much of our conversation is it's repetitive and it's organization focused. What happens when you build structure so that more of your time can be spent listening to Jesus as Jesus calls us to reach our community? So I'll be praying for y'all that the conversations around the table are transformed And we're focused again and again and again about what it means to be making disciples, what it means to be following Jesus, loving people, sharing God's grace. And so that's my prayer for y'all.
Thank you. I want to just thank everybody for being here tonight. I want you to know this is your tithe dollar at work. I have sent out over 50 books. We're nearing 60. I saw that I got a few emails from folks tonight needing the books. And so I think probably by the end of this call, we will have sent 75 books. Thankfully, thank you again, Dr. Bradford, for giving us some of these books at cost. That has been so awesome of you, and we appreciate you so much. And I am just thrilled and want to thank everybody for making this possible, that we can share this message with anyone and make this at no cost. So thank you to our local churches for everything that you do to support your annual conference. And as always, if you have any questions, please reach out to me. As I said in the chat, I will be sharing the slides, and I will be sharing a link to the video of tonight with you in an email tomorrow. So whatever email address that you registered for this training with, that is the email that you will receive the information. And I also put a link to Dr. Bradford's webpage, where there are also links to order the other book that is made specifically for smaller churches. Thank you so much. Let me pray for us before we go. And I'm just thrilled that we had so many people on here tonight, and grateful for Dr. Bradford and his gifts and his wisdom. Let us pray. Father God, we thank you for all of these churches represented tonight. We thank you for the fruits of the Spirit. We thank you for the leaders, the followers, and all of the people in between. We ask that you go with us and bless us, all in the name of your Son, Jesus. Amen. Good night, everybody. Thank you. Thank you, Blake.
Thank you. Thank you, friends.